Ladies and gentlemen, today we have former Chief of the Capitol Police Stephen Son and William Pope. Stephen Son is the author of the definitive account of January 6th in his book, Courage Under Fire. We are here to talk about what happened that day, where were their failures, what could have been done different, and what can we learn from a law enforcement perspective on what happened on January 6th. Chief Son, William Pope, good to see you.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me on, Brady and Will. It's a pleasure to meet you.
And you may remember that we've had William Pope on before. Will is a January 6th researcher and probably the most thorough researcher on January 6th, as well as a former defendant like myself. Thanks for coming on, Will.
Hey, glad to be here. And Chief Son, I'm glad we could talk today. You know, I think it's very important that both the police and defendants at some point begin having dialogues on what happened that day. So the fact that we're here talking, and I think we're all in favor of finding the truth of what actually happened, is a significant moment.
I agree with you. I think we do share a lot of synergy there. And there's been a number of occasions where I've run into people that had been placed under arrest as a result of January 6th. And, you know, we've had some, lively and very, very beneficial discussions. So I'm glad to be here.
Chief Son, would you mind talking about what happened to you on those, before we get into what happened before January 6th, as a result of the events that day? And I think many people have seen you on television and realized that you did everything you could to prevent the riot from occurring, from requesting National Guard, trying to get proper intelligence. But you kind of were in a similar boat to us in that your life changed dramatically after that event. Could you please just go ahead and tell us from a personal perspective and from a career perspective what precipitated after that day?
Wow. Jump into some heavy stuff right away. I'll tell you, and, January 6th, like you'd said, you try and prevent it in advance. I still believe, as I sit here today, January 6th was 100% preventable. I tried to prevent it multiple times on January 3rd, tried to prevent it on January 6th, repeatedly denied bringing in resources that by law, I have to request permission by law to bring in any federal resources for my officers. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. To go through that, see what happened, literally, bring in 17 agencies that helped us regain control of the Capitol and get Congress back in session within 4.5 hours when people thought it'd be days. Get them back into session. I briefed up the Vice President Pence, who was still up on Capitol Hill. I briefed Speaker Pelosi not once, not twice, 3 times, along with other leadership. And then the very next day, January 7th, haven't slept in 38 hours, trying to work on press releases, talking to my officers. I've got an officer in the hospital at this point. Brian Sicknick is in critical condition, still in the hospital. So dealing with all that, when I get a notification, I'm actually in a conference room briefing Senator Roy Blunt about what we're moving forward with the National Guard and the security on Capitol Hill. And I get a notification from a advisor for Speaker Pelosi telling me that Speaker Pelosi is getting ready to go on national TV and call for my resignation. I literally had probably 2 minutes before the press conference started, had enough time to notify my wife. She basically said, and I'll make this viewable on all platforms, basically, screw them, they don't deserve you. So I actually went to go back in and finish up the briefing with Roy Blunt when my general counsel said, no, you actually should probably go watch the press conference. Watch the press conference, and at the end of the press conference, somebody asked her, and it's a planning question. You now know, because we now have the video from Alexandra Pelosi, that this absolutely was a planted question to find out, what are you going to do about security failure on the Hill? She blames the security failure 100% on me by name, says the failure of leadership at the top of the Capitol Police, calls me out by name, says she's calling for my resignation, and then adds, besides, I haven't even spoken to him since this happened. I'd spoken to her 3 times. I thought long and hard about it. Again, had slept in 38 hours. And went ahead and tendered my resignation with a transition period to help whoever was going to be acting chief. is a couple-week transition period. If I'll tell you this, if I knew then what I know now, I would have never done it. I would have held a press conference immediately in front of Capitol Police headquarters and told them everything that I'd tried to do. But nevertheless, that evening I go home. Friday morning I get a call, and there's no more transition period. They want me out of my office immediately. They're going to make Yogananda Pittman acting chief. She's moving into the office over the weekend. I need to immediately go in, clear everything out, and be out of the office by Monday and do everything I can to support her. Completely took away the transition period. I was just months away from being vested. That all went away. Didn't get retirement, no benefits, and yanked out. And took a 30-year career. You got to understand, I've been in policing for 30 years, 25 with DC Police, a little over 4.5, a little over 25 with DC Police, 4.5 with Capitol Police. I've handled everything from major events, inaugurations, Bush 2001, all the way up to the 2017 Trump's inauguration. Done many of those. Done incident command, 2009 Holocaust Museum shooting, 2012 Family Research Council, 2013 Navy Yard, and 2017 attack on the Republican baseball team. I was involved in all of those. So I've had a rich history. I've never had a single level of discipline in my entire 30 years. It was destroyed in a matter of seconds by Speaker Pelosi going on and blaming me for January 6th, when the law specifically says I have to get permission, and in advance they have to get leadership's concurrence. So she's included, and it was her her sergeant at arms that denied me on the 3rd repeatedly. Called the other sergeant at arms, who he sent me to go talk to, who's the chairman of the Capitol Police Board, and said, "We can't. Son's coming to you to ask for National Guard assistance. We got to come up with another plan. Speaker Pelosi will never go through this." So he shot down both sides. So, coming into it, I did what I could to try and prevent it. And I was literally made the face of the security failure on January 6th. I'm just glad that I'm actually initially was really upset that Alexandra Pelosi was there filming. But I later came to really appreciate the fact that that video was recorded, and the January 6th committee under Barry Loudermilk got hold of that and released it, because it really showed her true colors and her sense of responsibility for that day.
Hey, Chief, do you think if you would have stayed on for those final 2 weeks before the inauguration, do you think there are things you would have found after the fact that might have changed your perspective or changed the world's perspective on what happened?
I absolutely think I would have had access to possibly find out, because they cut off all access. I wasn't involved in any of the after action. I wasn't involved in any of the reviews of force. I wasn't involved in the review of the force involving Ashley Babbitt. Wasn't involved in any of that. So it would have been nice to be involved, but I had enough whistleblowers came out, especially about intelligence, and started pushing information my way that really helped me out. For the next 14 months, I sat in the chair I'm in right now and literally did my own after action report. I wrote 800 pages of notes and put it into a what I'd consider to be an after action report, which now is about a 396 page book. That I never planned to write. I tell people it was the hardest book I wish I never had to write. That just goes through and talks about the repeated failures from the bureaucracy on Capitol Hill, the failures with intelligence, the failures not just externally with the FBI or DHS internally, and then the failures with, once I got approval to bring over the National Guard, who were within eyesight of the Capitol, the pushback I started to get from Pentagon officials. So there's so many levels that we could have just gotten out of the way of this train. I just wish it would have happened, and we weren't dealing with this, and I wouldn't be here today.
So as you've had a lot of time to reflect, and clearly a person doesn't ascend to be the chief of potentially the most important police department in the country. They're not gonna put a slouch in that position. And leading up to January 6th, you were doing your best to get intelligence to help better understand the personality of the crowd and what threats you were facing. What steps do you usually take on an event like this, and what did you take that day?
So just to give your viewers just a little bit of a background on Capitol Police, let me just take a minute to just talk about Capitol Police. Capitol Police Department, 25th largest police department in the country. A lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, you had 300, 400, 500 officers. I had 1,963 officers that day, about 320 civilians. Pretty large, significant police department. We have everything from your patrol officers to investigators to executive protection to a bomb squad. So when you think about law enforcement and you think about whether it's compared to Secret Service or some of these other agencies, the executive branch has a bunch of different law enforcement agencies to protect the executive branch. You got DEA, Secret Service, ATF. I'm trying to think of some Federal Protective Service, CBP. You name it, you got a lot of law enforcement agencies. When you think of the legislative branch of government and the 535 members of Congress that need to be protected, there's one law enforcement agency, and that's the United States Capitol Police. So we have our full service intel agency. So coming into January 6th, just to give you an idea of what we expected, January 6th for me was really the third, what we called the MAGA rallies. If you remember November, I think it was November 12th, maybe 12th or 14th, we had MAGA 1. December, maybe it was November 14th, December 12th, we had, I think it was MAGA 2. So I looked at this as the third MAGA rally. We had great intelligence, MAGA 1, MAGA 2. We got daily intelligence reports, we got assessments, gave us a clear understanding of what was going on. The group was literally marching right across the street from the Capitol is the United States Supreme Court. They were marching up to the Supreme Court, but all through Capitol grounds to get up there. We planned for it. We put up the fencing according to the intelligence, and everything worked out as expected. January 6th, same thing. The only difference is I had a different director of intelligence. My former director of intelligence had notified us 6 months, 8 months in advance that he planned to be retiring. So we had gone through a process, done a search, and ended up bringing in 2 people to help run intel. One of them, I now find out, had some problems and was never running intel. The deputy director that we brought over ended up running intel for a while. And the assessments that we were getting was lacking all the critical intelligence that we now know they had. We had a number of intel analysts come out and say we were pushing information up saying, people were planning on storming the Capitol. People were, looking at all these different aspects of attacking the Capitol, and some of the rhetoric that we were seeing. None of it was being reported in my intelligence assessments. My assistant director of intelligence had a intelligence briefing on January 4th, Monday at 1:00. I was never invited to. So if you think they were sitting on a significant intelligence that was going to tell a story of a significant threat against the Capitol, you would make sure that the chief would go to the intelligence briefing. I've been to many briefings. I was actually the one that usually asked most of the questions, but this one I was never invited to. My intelligence unit actually also put out a daily intelligence report, DIR, as it was called, on the 4th, 5th, and January 6th, the morning of January 6th, with the report of intelligence. I mean, the intelligence that was indicating an indication of civil disobedience of arrests to be low to improbable. Think about that. So people need to understand the intelligence doesn't just inform me. It informs the Capitol Police Board, which oversees the Capitol Police, and that would make the determination for mutual aid, National Guard, bigger fencing, stuff like that. But they also inform congressional members of Congress and congressional leadership. Members of the Intelligence Division, Deputy Chief specifically that oversees it, was briefing members of Congress as late as the day before, Tuesday, January 5th, that this was just going to be like the previous 2 MAGA rallies. Even the Sergeant Arms got briefed to that. So we expected the same. We expected intelligence assessments that were based on intelligence from internal to Capitol Police and external from our external law enforcement intelligence partners, FBI and DHS, to properly inform us so we knew, what type of fencing to use, if we need mutual aid, things like that. So that's where we came up short. My request for National Guard, my first request for National Guard on January 3rd, was based solely on my experience. I've worked many major events. I knew I had a fairly large bicycle rack perimeter. The bicycle rack's only 4 feet tall, 8 feet long. They weigh about 42 pounds each. So it's not a significant barrier. I only had 273 officers to kind of fill in that whole perimeter around the Capitol, which isn't much. And those also have to be CDU response. So if I have a CDU platoon of 40 officers, now you deduct that, you have 233 officers. So it quickly comes down as you pull out CDU platoons. So I didn't have many officers on the perimeter. That's why on January 3rd, I went requesting National Guard support, unarmed. All I wanted was unarmed National Guard. We've used them before. to help stand the fence line around the Capitol, and was denied twice on January 3rd.
Well, what have we learned since that they already knew, that they did know?
As far as intelligence?
Yeah, what have we learned so far that would have been critical information for you to have?
Oh, the threats to people to attack the Capitol, the threats to people were talking about. I'm trying to think of some of the stuff attacking Supreme Court, threats against Supreme Court members. Oh, threats to kill my police officers. There was a threat up there saying, let's kill the Capitol Guards. No, let's kill the, I'm trying to think of what the terminology was. It's something about the guards. And that's a reference to my police officers, Capitol Police. So that was out there, never in any of the intelligence assessments. Things like that would have not only helped me better prepare, it would have guided the Capitol Police Board. So when I asked for National Guard support, Paul Irving wouldn't have come back and said, no, the intelligence really doesn't support it.
Hey, Chief.
Yes, sir.
I know, like, when I woke up on January 6th, I had no idea or even thought of going into the Capitol. The day just kind of unfolded that way. And I think that would be true of most of the people that ended up being in there.
True for me.
But as far as the intelligence goes, I've dug into some of those threats that were made beforehand, and you have, for instance, Sam Andrews, who called for 500,000 armed men coming to Washington. And this guy has a previous background in an intel agency, and he was in the Capitol Police Intelligence back in December. Do you think that potentially some of those threats being made might have been, or why, I don't know, why would a former intelligence operator even do that kind of thing? Or the guy he was talking to on January 6th, Doug Hagman,
on broadcast,
claims to be an FBI operational asset, and he was calling for people to breach the chambers on his live internet show.
Yeah, why somebody would do that, especially somebody from an intel community or intel background, I don't know. That's extremely concerning that you think that happens. There's now some video out there, I think, of some law enforcement agency. I think it's DC Police, with somebody in the DC Police in plain clothes telling people you need to move forward, go into the Capitol, you need to get into the Capitol. That's unacceptable. I mean, I've run big events, and that's not how you train. That's how you trap. That's not a good thing to do. And I agree with you when you talk about some of the people that went into the Capitol. I think, you probably had a very small core group that I call the disturbers. I'll leave the second part of that out, but that were really out there, that were intent on causing harm, were intent on breaching the Capitol. And then I think you also have a number of people that I refer to as straphangers. They're there, they're seeing, okay, hey, they're just following in the crowd. They're seeing some of the doors open. They're just going in. Those are the people you see just taking pictures as they walk through. So I agree with you there that I don't think there was a majority of the people that went, not at all, though. I think it was a majority of the people that wanted to, cause havoc or violence against my officers. I think you had a number that just went and, saw the doors open and decided to walk in and walk through.
I feel like that J6 being a very complex day, that there were a lot of individuals that committed bad acts. There were officers that were attacked. There was property destruction. But there was also these individuals you just mentioned that went in through open doors. Do you feel like, combined with some of the things you've seen, that there was either some element to some degree of people that wanted to entrap individuals, or there was some element of maybe perceived permissive entry on the part of the protesters?
So the only element that I would say, outrightly that you see of permissive, I'd maybe say permissive entry, is you'll see a couple of the pictures. Like, you'll see one guy, he's by himself. And when I say one guy, one Capitol Police officer, he's by himself. He's kind of standing against the wall, like he's standing at post. I think this may actually be the officer that someone does a selfie with as they go by. That person was disciplined, was actually suspended for taking that selfie. And from what I understand, I've had a chance to talk to him. He's like, he talked to me, he said, Chief, what am I supposed to do? I'm one person. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of these protesters that are coming through. I didn't abandon my post. I'm standing at my post. What am I supposed to do? I can't form a physical barrier or a response to them. So I just kind of stood back and they just walked by. So when you talk about permissive entry, I think you're going to have some of those cases where the officers felt overwhelmed. They didn't have the resources necessary to form some type of a barrier or create a response to them, and just kind of held their, held their positions. So I think you may have some of that. There's a number of instances where there's a video of like an officer. It looks like she's waving at the crowd, come on in, and then you see the crowd start, kind of moving toward her. Well, if you go back and you look, like I said, I brought in 17 law enforcement agencies. They're not on the same radio channel, and it was extremely noisy outside to hear over the radio. They were waving at some of the other officers that, hey, we're going to a fallback position inside the Capitol, and she's trying to notify them to fall back. So she's not sitting there waving at the crowd to come in. So you're going to see a couple of cases where I think that's probably just an explanation of what you saw. It wasn't us waving the people in.
Do you think there was any element, though, of some group potentially, or coordination of groups to create the event or to entrap some of the protesters? Do you think there's any element of that?
Well, I think you've got a couple of people that you see on the West Front, and I'm not talking about uniformed officers. I'm talking about people that look like they're either part of the protest group that are out there with a bullhorn. I think you had somebody telling people you got to go in. You've got another person the day before that's seen down around the old executive office building by the White House telling people you got to go into the Capitol tomorrow. You got to go into the Capitol tomorrow. That I tend to wonder, what role did they maybe play in this? But I do think you have some people out there that are trying to coordinate people and trying to push them to move forward into the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book, and I've got a copy of your book right here. You've done a great effort to try to factually document the events from your perspective. And I agree, like, depending on where you were that day, you saw the events differently. Like, you had the perspective of a chief of police, individual protesters on the ground, like they were coming with a much different perspective and seeing events unfolding. So if they saw an officer doing one thing, they might have judged it in their mind a certain way. And the officers, they might have seen events in their mind and judged it a different way, which caused it to unfold. But in your book, you pretty extensively go through some of the things that the military and the DHS and some of these other agencies could have done differently. Do you think that had a contributing effect on what happened?
100%. The big things I talk about are, and I appreciate the kind words about the book. And you're absolutely right. I look at it from a chief of police perspective. The bureaucracy on the Hill was number one, and well, number one would probably be intelligence, but bureaucracy on the Hill, like I told you about that law that requires that I go and request permission. I'm 30 years law enforcement. I got more law enforcement experience than everybody on the Capitol Police. Well, they've got experience in the Secret Service. I've been a cop. To be denied multiple times, that was frustrating as hell. Congress changed the law 11 months after January 6th. So anybody that thinks that that's not factual, why did Congress change the law? They changed it based on my testimony. Now it gives the chief of police the ability to call in resources without going through that. So yeah, when I look at it, yes, I think if the bureaucracy, which they're now trying to change, that would have helped. Intelligence was probably the number one thing. If intelligence had been far more accurate, and again, I'll tell you, intelligence for January 6th was handled differently than any other major event I've seen in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. If we're going to do an inauguration, if we're going to do a state funeral or a State of the Union address or even a July 4th celebration, FBI, everybody gets together. FBI always puts out what's called a JIB, a Joint Intelligence Bulletin. Comes out a couple days before, gives an outline of what the threat assessment is, which is assessed at whatever level it is, and then they'll distribute that. And if there's enough concern, they'll put all the chiefs of police on a conference call and say, hey, we're going to have one of our intelligence assessments brief you, assessors, analysts brief you. We're going to get everyone on a conference call. If they're really concerned, they're going to call the chiefs down from the National Capital Region down to the SCIF, and I've been called down there many times, down to the SCIF, and they're going to give us a briefing in the SCIF on the top of WFO. None of that occurred. No JIB, no conference call, no briefing. Mm-hmm. So for us, and I'm not alone in my thoughts, even Chief Conti, who was with the DC Police at the time, said, we were never notified of the concerns they have. And I can tell you, from what I understand, the J6 committee and the chairman is finding out with the recent release from the FBI, there's even more concerning intelligence that they didn't pass on to us. So I'm waiting to hear that. Intelligence would have been key. The number one thing that would have changed this whole thing. If the intelligence had been correct, I would have had mutual aid, would have had National Guard, would have had a bigger fence, and this wouldn't have happened. Congress has actually ever even said that. And I don't mean to interrupt you, Will. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
March of 2024, Congress put out a report that specifically said if the sergeant at arms had approved son's request for National Guard on January 3rd, chances are the Capitol would have never been breached.
Well, having requested the National Guard multiple times and having been basically denied the intelligence, what was the emotional burden and what was that like emotionally to be in the command center and have to witness all this?
Oh, it was frustrating as hell. I'm in the command center, and the wall behind me, 12 inches, 24 inches sitting behind me is representatives from the Capitol Police Board. You got the representative from the two the House Sergeant Arms, the Senate Sergeant Arms, the Architect of the Capitol, all watching the video screens right in front of me. The same thing I'm seeing. I'm repeatedly calling, asking, starting at 12:58, I call 9 times every couple of minutes. Hey, where are we on my request? Oh, we're running it up the chain. The first time I asked Paul Irving at 12:58, I called him up. I said, hey, our folks are getting their rear ends handed to them on the West Front. I need to bring in federal resources now. And National Guard is within eyesight of the Capitol. They've got 198, I think it's 198 officers within eyesight of the Capitol that they could have deployed. And he says, I'm going to run it up the chain. I'll be right back to you. Repeatedly, I called both Paul Irving and Mike Stinger, who is the Senate Sergeant at Arms, just got the same response. Paul Irving said he's just waiting, should be any minute. Mike Stinger is waiting for Paul Irving to make a decision. They won't make a decision. It was frustrating as hell. I got to tell you, to this day, I felt, when I got up that morning, probably, matter of fact, right when that whole thing started going south on the West Front, I felt a lightning bolt of electricity go through me that didn't. It still is with me. It's left a little bit. But even now I'm reliving it. I can just feel my hands start to shake. It was the most frustrating thing I've ever dealt with. I'm on the phone with the Pentagon. At 2:09, I finally get approval to bring in resources. I've already called the National Guard. I already called Will Walker, General Walker at 1:49 and said, please send me whatever you've got. And he asked me, he goes, do you have the emergency declaration yet? I said, I'll have it any minute. Just please start the resources my way. This is life and death. I still remember telling him I was shaking. At 1:49, 2:09, I get permission. I call him immediately, said, I now have permission. Please send me whatever you got. So I'm thinking resources are coming. 2:28, I start getting these notifications. Pentagon's trying to get me on a call. I finally, after going through and being put on elevator music and on hold, they patch me through and get me on at 2:34 onto this call with the Pentagon, where I'm saying I need National Guard support here immediately, as quickly as you can. And I'm sure, now it's all over national news, and I'm sure they're watching it on the big screen TVs at the Pentagon. I'm begging for assistance, saying, please send me whatever you got. On the phone is Chief Conti with the DC Police, Mayor Bowser, Lieutenant Walter Pyatt, Lieutenant General with the U.S. Army Staff Director, Lieutenant General Christopher Flynn, Colonel Earl Matthews, who at one point was the General Counsel for the U.S. Army, among others. And many of these have notes. Earl Matthews actually became a whistleblower on my behalf. And I'm begging for assistance. Lieutenant General Walter Pyatt says, I don't like the optics of the National Guard at the U.S. Capitol.
Wow.
I'd much rather I don't like the optics. I'd much rather replace your officers on traffic posts and let them handle the fight. The reason why what he said was important was on January 3rd, when I went at 9:35 in the morning and asked Paul Irving for National Guard assistance, his first response was, I don't like the optics of the National Guard at the Capitol. Exact same thing Walter Pyatt told me a couple days later. So here I am. We're right in the middle of the fighting. I'm watching my officers having their rear ends handed to them.
People climbing the walls.
People climbing the walls. And this is the response I'm getting. I'm telling them, sir, I don't have anybody on traffic posts. I need assistance now. He responds, he goes, my recommendation to the Secretary of the Army is not to support your request. I am dumbfounded. I'm just shaking right now just thinking about this. He tells me to support your request. Robert Conti, the chief of DC Police, butts in and goes, well, hold on a second. You're denying Chief Son's request? He goes, well, no, I'm not really denying it. I just don't like the optics. I'd much rather relieve his officers on post. So here we are going into this damn circle again. And I said, sir, I don't have anybody on post. Everybody's in the fight. I need assistance here now. At that point, he tells me, I'm going to run it up the chain. There's another person not making a decision. He's going to run it up the chain. And he doesn't tell me what he's going to recommend either way. It's at that point It's now 2:43, and you all know what happens at 2:43. We have the report of shots fired. I'm in the command center. I'm now hearing multiple reports of shots fired inside the Capitol. We had reports of shots fired earlier in the day that turned out to be false. I was worried as hell. You've got something like this going on. I've got outside agencies coming in, multiple agencies coming in. I'm watching the fighting. Last thing I want to do is see, lethal force on either side used. We hear the report of shots fired. We now hear they're sending emergency assistance. They got somebody down. So now we're having confirmation. I'm on the phone with the Pentagon. I finally said, because it's still an open line, I said, we now have shots fired in the Capitol. Is that urgent enough for you now? And hung up the phone. Because now I had to get in touch with the Capitol Police Board and start, making notifications there. Yeah, I'd have to say that was one of the most frustrating days in my 30-year law enforcement career I've ever had, if not the most frustrating day I've ever experienced.
Now, hearing you describe that, it almost sounds like the DOD was wanting the situation to deteriorate at the Capitol.
Right. That's what I feel like.
Obviously, that would be a little bit of speculation, but there has been some reporting that, JSOC from DOD, Special Operations Command, had seconded commandos to the FBI. We don't know exactly what capacity they were working in that day. Do you think potentially there might have been DOD in the crowd? And I ran into a guy a few months ago playing Ultimate Frisbee, and he told me that the National Guard often has undercover people in crowds like this, where they're just going around monitoring. DOD had people in the crowd?
So National Guard, I've used National Guard. What people don't realize, there's a program called DISCA, Defense Support for Civil Authorities. I've sworn in my career, I'd say thousands of National Guard troops, everywhere from 9/11 in 2001. We had to bring in National Guard troops to help set security perimeters around parts of infrastructure in Washington, D.C. And over time, for major events, we'd bring in National Guard. I'd swear them in to help support inauguration, stuff like that. I've never, ever in my career heard about National Guard putting plainclothes resources out there. I've never heard of that. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying in my time, and I've worked a lot with National Guard, I've never heard of that. Now, I would have been, and this is something I've always said in all my interviews, I would have been really surprised if they said there was no federal resources in the crowd. I've always said that. A major event doesn't take place in Washington, D.C. without, you've got the Joint Terrorism Task Force, you've got Secret Service that's going to have some plainclothes assets out there, you got FBI that's going to have some plainclothes assets out there. You've got intel units with D.C., you got intel units with Park. For you to tell me that there's going to be no federal or law enforcement assets out there, that's ridiculous. That's why I've said that all along. There's going to be some assets out there. So I was just waiting for that to come out. So as far as military operatives in the crowd, I've got really nothing to support that there was military operatives out there. It'd be scary if there was. But I will say this: there's no doubt. So Christopher Miller, who was the acting Secretary of Defense at the time, had said there was no way he was putting National Guard east of 9th Street, which means 9th Street, when you look at the National Mall, 9th Street, right beyond that is going to be up toward the Capitol. So he had already made the decision not to put National Guard up toward the Capitol. And I think that goes back to really some guidance and advice from General Mark Milley. General Mark Milley, I think, had been in touch with members of the cabinet, Haskell, I think, who was with the agency, a couple other people that felt that President Trump may try and do do an insurrection act or something and try and take control of the city or of Congress, something like that. So I think he was kind of advising Christopher Miller not to get military involved. So I think that was a big pushback. And you look at, we now know, so Christopher Miller and Christopher Miller and General Milley, sorry, there's so many names, had been very concerned about violence at the White House. Sorry. Let me sorry. They had been so concerned about violence at the Capitol on January 3rd and January 4th. They had actually talked about locking down the city. I know this now because Milley had talked about it in an interview with Carol Leonnig of the Washington Post. Said he was so worried about violence at the Capitol, he talked about locking down Washington, D.C. and revoking the permits issued on Capitol Hill. I'm the person that issues those permits. No one said a word to me about this violence. And to lock down the city, That's a huge stretch for the U.S. military to come in and lock down the city. Why the hell they wouldn't tell anybody, I don't know. So I got a couple of questions. One, what intelligence did Mark Milley have? Who did he talk to about this intelligence? Did he brief Speaker Pelosi? Did he brief any members of Congress? Because I sure as hell would like to know that, because that would have been a big role in, why am I being denied as I'm requesting resources in advance when they may already know there's a significant threat against the Capitol?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions remaining on DOD. For my case, like I was on the east side of the Capitol, and I saw police officers running under the northeast steps. And then I saw protesters coming out the Senate carriage door there. So my brother and I walked up to see what was going on. We didn't know what was transpiring on the west side of the Capitol. We don't know the windows had been broken or how people had gotten in there, but we saw there were protesters coming out of the Capitol. And I mean, this was kind of a curiosity. We went up there to check it out. And I was standing at the door, and one of the guys who came through the Capitol then turned around and tried to force his way back in past police, and they pushed him out. And then he came around behind me and began repeatedly lunging into me, pushing me in the door. And I tried to get his name for years and years and years. And finally, the DOJ was compelled by the court to give it to me. And it turns out he's a guy who had his security clearance renewed by the DOD, lived in Indiana, working at a base where JSOC has support operations. So I do have questions about that. But yeah, they knew his identity back in 2021, but they wouldn't give it to me until 2024. So, but yeah, there are a lot of questions remaining on that. Now, I read Julie Farnham's book a couple weeks ago, and she has a much different perspective than you do. I think you've done a much better job of documenting the details of what happened that day. She's a little bit loose with the facts, but she did say that in late December, she shared very concerning intelligence with Gallagher. And then she claims that on the day of January 6th, she was so concerned that she told her au pair, her nanny, to get her kid out of the city. So if she was that concerned, why didn't she share that with you? Like
that's a very, very good question, Will. And there's, she's got a number of intel analysts within her shop that came out as whistleblowers against her, that she ultimately tried to discipline, and the department did not protect them as whistleblowers as they should have. That was revealing that it showed me some of the intelligence that they were pushing up to her that weren't being included in the assessments. All along she talks about they did 3 assessments, 3 or 4, and on the last assessment, after it's probably a 15-page assessment, there's a final paragraph after 2.5 pages of the DC street closures that basically just says this day there may be a propensity for violence against police. You may have a greater sense of desperation. You may have this. A lot of qualifiers in a final paragraph that it doesn't talk about what they assess it as, like the level that we assess this as a high level of probability of violence. Nothing you would have expected at the very beginning, to say, hey, the most critical executive summary is we're expecting, we evaluate this as a high level of violence. Nothing. So the whole time she's kind of rested on that final paragraph as, hey, look, I called it all along. When that came out on the 3rd, the evening of the 3rd, the 4th, like I said before, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, her unit puts out intelligence assessment saying the chance of arrest for civil disobedience are low to improbable. So, she can claim that all she wants, but it was absolutely a failure. The chief of police that came in, that was finally after I left, they actually put the assistant chief in charge of intelligence, Yogananda Pittman, as the acting chief. And the union went wild knowing that she hadn't been correct on the intelligence that she had provided. So they no longer made her chief. They did a nationwide search and brought in a guy by the name of Tom Manger, who had previously been with Fairfax County Police and Montgomery County Police. And under testimony, he said it was an absolute intelligence failure. So even her own chief that took over afterwards for that Julie Farnham worked for said it was an absolute failure. Congress has said it was an absolute intelligence failure. So, don't take my word for it. It could have been handled much better, and it would have been a game changer if it had.
Mm-hmm. Now, the intelligence that you were getting is one aspect of it, but there is video from the evening of January 6th that shows a very loud public address system telling people to disperse from the Capitol. Is that just out of my own curiosity, is that a speaker built into the Capitol, and why wasn't it used earlier?
So it's a speaker system that's built throughout the Capitol. So when you think of the Capitol, a lot of people just look at the Capitol building. It's more of like a campus. You've got the House congressional buildings. You have the Senate congressional buildings on the north side, House on the south side. You've got the Library of Congress, which now falls under Capitol Authority. So I look at it more of a campus. So these are some mounted around various parts of the campus. But that's a good question. I don't know why that voice wasn't used earlier. It probably would have been a good voice to use. The thing that concerns me, there's a number of things operationally that I wish had been handled a little bit better. And I wish I hadn't been stuck, making those multiple phone calls. I mean, I was up there for that hour and a half, whatever it was, making 32 phone calls trying to coordinate resources. And then once we did get a permission, then I'm on the call with the Pentagon, then I'm on the call, with the Capitol Police Board, then I'm trying to set up a resource. So I'm sitting here trying to bring in the resources when I have officials that should have been doing a better job handling operations. And that's where I look back and said, hey, whether it's, command center or somebody like that, it would have been great to implement what they call the big voice and start putting out warnings or start putting out notifications. We'll often use it for active shooter notifications, but I don't know if anybody, I don't even recall that coming up when I was in the command center.
I think from my perspective, like had I heard that, I would have walked away immediately. But that has been a big question of mine for 4 years now.
Yeah. If you were able to head your own congressional panel and your own inquiry, who would be the witnesses that you would deem most important to find out what really occurred, and what would you ask them?
Wow. Oh boy.
It's pretty broad.
Yeah, it's pretty broad. It'd go both. I'd probably do a little bit deeper dive into some people internal to Capitol Police. Probably do a deeper dive into some congressional advisors, some high-level advisors that worked very closely on the Senate and on the House side, specifically for Speaker Pelosi, for information they may know. And the reason why I'm right now a little hesitant to mention their names is, I know the committees continue to work. I try and, make recommendations to the committee as best I can. They've already asked me, hey, if we want you to come down and testify, you willing to come down and testify? Oh yeah, you don't need to send me a subpoena. I'll be there. But most people already know my testimony. But I'd want to know everything from, like I said, DOD. What is this intelligence General Milley knew in advance? Allegedly, General Milley says he was using a intelligence platform called Data Miner. Why is he using this intelligence platform? Is that a violation of law? I'd like to know a little bit about that. Who did he talk to? What did various members of Congress know in advance? Like I said, there's some advisors I'd like to know what they may have known. Speaker Pelosi, it'd be nice to know. So I'll tell you, Benny Thompson, the head of the January 6th Select Committee, said specifically when they made the Select Committee that Speaker Pelosi's cell phone data, texts, emails, all off limits, and her herself was off limits. It'd be nice to get some firsthand responses from her about what exactly happened. I think those would be a couple of the key ones initially. I'd probably call in. Yeah.
Now, in your book, you mentioned a few unusual requests you got from members of Congress leading up to January 6th. And in fact, it seemed like Mitch McConnell wanted to leave the East Side Plaza on the Senate side open.
So yeah,
explain more about that.
So it's interesting. It all comes down to how the bureaucracy of the security on Capitol Hill. So, and I'm trying to think. I think that was. Let's see. So I talk a lot about security on the Hill. So what we had was you have the House and the Senate side. Mm-hmm. Literally, you could draw a line right down the center of the Capitol from east to west, and it could be run differently. The security on each side. So on the Senate side, whether if we're having like a Supreme Court justice nomination, the Senate would be like, hey, we got to lock down the East Plaza. We want to make sure no protesters can get onto the East Plaza, where the members of Congress will park their cars during votes, things like that to make sure we can keep it safe. The House side would say, no, we want to keep this wide open and keep the fence open so protesters can get in, so that it's the people's house, so they can kind of have a
Redress a grievance.
some impact. So yeah, some impact on the members of Congress. So they'd want them to be able to get the access. So that's the type of stuff I was dealing with. So coming up on January 6th, I'd looked at the perimeter. I'd seen parts of the perimeter on the west front. That didn't include that the fencing was, cut out around certain areas. And I said, no, actually, guys, we need to have the fence line going all the way up on the side. That's one of the things that made me ask for the support, because I'm like, this fence line's pretty big, going up all the way on the side and then coming around. And then someone went up and completely enclosed the whole east front, where the side you were on, I think, Will, where we had the 6 groups that were that had permits to demonstrate. Well, my experience, and I've read the Supreme Court decisions as well, we can't fence in areas where people have permits to protest. If for some reason we have to go, if we have to do an emergency evacuation, or if we have to use chemical munitions, you always got to give them a way out. So you can't pen them in. So I had to sit there and look over and say, no, guys, we got to now move the fence again. This is on probably the evening of the 4th or the 5th, because we can't pen them in. So we had to adjust that a little bit. But I do remember the Stinger, when I finally came up with a plan for the front that included more fencing. Stinger said, yeah, we want that on our side too, which would have been speaking for Mitch McConnell. So that was the final decision, and they ended up, I had to send them an image of it. They both had to sign off on it. That's how bureaucratic it was. So yeah, that's my remembrance of it.
So lately, a lot of people have been talking about the pipe bomber, and we're still trying to figure out who that was. But on the day of January 6th, there were a lot of other incidents that were going off simultaneous to the discovery of those pipe bombs, including like a fake rifle. I think there was a vehicle in a parking garage, and all of that was coming up on your radar. Do you think that was coincidental? That seems odd to me.
So a lot was happening at the same time. So I'm in the command center. It's probably right around noon. We have the event on the ellipse on some of the TV screens. So we've got video screens. Then right in the center on the front of the command center, we have a couple of news feeds. So I'd actually turned and said, hey, I think the president was getting ready to go up and to start a speech. So I had them turn up the volume so we can hear his speech and hear him talking. At one point, he mentions how he's going to march up to the Capitol with them. And I actually turned toward Deputy Chief Gallagher and said, hey, did you just hear what he just said? He might march to the Capitol. I said, give Secret Service a call and find out if he may be coming up here to visit us. So we're going through that. I do remember the report of the rifle coming out and them finding the vehicle with all the Molotov cocktails in it. I don't right now remember the timing of that, but I do remember this. It's probably right around, let's see, I've got my notes here right near, probably right around 12:40, 43, 44. The pipe bomb was found at 12:42. I'm in the command center. I look over and I have what's called a watch commander. He's the person in charge of all operations within the command center. He's a former EOD, Explosive Ordnance Division officer, and oversaw the EOD team. John Wisham, Lieutenant Wisham. And I still remember he looks at his phone and he gives me one of these looks. And you can tell when someone gives you one of those looks that this is an oh shucks look. And he keeps looking back at me as he's talking to this person on the phone. And then I see an image show up on his phone. And he comes over and he shows me the image of the pipe bomb that's behind the RNC that they had taken the picture of, the one people see out there all the time. So that couldn't have come at the worst time. So at that point, it's 12:44. We're sending a bunch of resources over there. The officers that are in the Cannon House office building are hearing about this. And now they're starting to evacuate. They're calling for resources to help evacuate all the offices that are occupied on that side of the building that face that alleyway, just in case. Because if you do have a live pipe bomb, it goes off. This stuff, flies off about 25,000 feet per second. So you want to do whatever you can to protect the area. So we're sending a lot of resources over there, not just our bomb techs. We're sending over, officials to run incident command. We're sending over people to evacuate the RNC, the DNC, the buildings over there, close down the metro. So it's significant resources. Couldn't have come at a worse time. And then at 12:53, we have the riot get out of hand on the West Front. We have the group come up and rapidly start becoming very physical with our officers at the what I call the Peace Circle and Maryland Avenue Circle on the West Front. So that couldn't have come at a worse time. And then I always had it at 12:49 when we had the second pipe bomb, but now I think that actually came in a little bit earlier. I think it was found probably about 1:49. I think it was found probably closer to about 1:10, 1:15, because everything just started happening so
But it
quickly.
did pull resources away from a department that was already stretched thin in securing the Capitol.
Absolutely. That's why it absolutely couldn't come at a worse time. They pulled a number of resources away from us, number of personnel to help secure that area around the pipe bomb, and left us more vulnerable over at the Capitol. That's why to this day I still feel it was a diversionary tactic. It was there specific. It was organized. When you look at the fact that the two pipe bombs are identical in construction, that's an organized operation. And it absolutely, I think, was designed, one, to be identified, to be found, whether it's by a dog through the limited amount of black powder that was on it or with it, or by visual. Anybody can look at that and say that's a pipe bomb. You got a kitchen timer and a galvanized metal pipe. That screams pipe bomb. So I absolutely, to this day, feel that was an operation to specifically divert a diversionary tactic to impact our capabilities.
And I think a few of those other things that went off, they might not have had as much of an effect on you, but like Metro PD, they were responding to a lot of those other incidents, which kept them from responding immediately to the Capitol as well.
Right.
On that thought, if you could take yourself back to the White House protest of 2020, and I want to ask you a little bit how that was treated differently, how the perpetrators were treated differently. But the first question I have is, do you remember if there was if there was an equal or number of distraction events or diversionary events on that day, or was this unusual that this occurred on January 6th?
So going back to, it was May 30th through June 1st, were the protests 2020 over at the White House. I was in the command center for those days. I remember listening to the radio. I don't recall I don't recall pipe bombs. I don't recall any of the diversionary devices that I experienced on the 6th occurring that same time. I know there's a lot of different stuff going on, a lot of different protests down around the White House and what became BLM Plaza right there. But it was mainly Lafayette Park. It was mainly that area. You have H Street, you have 16th Street, you have Lafayette Park, where the protests were happening. You had asked me about, to talk about that a little bit. I actually talk about it in the book. Because I think it plays a role. When people think about, was there a two-tier justice system approach to this? It's hard not to say there was when you look at January 6th compared to the 2020 protest down at the White House. You have 3 days of protest. January 6th, we had 5.5 hours. 3 days of protest down at the White House. There was a number of people arrested. All charges were dropped. More officers were injured down at the White House. More property damage down at the White House, yet all charges were dropped. How do you make sense of that? But what's even more concerning for me as a former DC police officer, and I heard this from a number of my former DC police colleagues, was the fact that DC police, if I had my old ID folder I could open up for you, and it says an agency formed by Congress, specifically, one of the reasons is for the protection of the president. That's what we're sworn to do, was prevented from responding to assist at the White House during those protests in 2020. They were forced to stand on 15th and 17th Street, the two streets that border the White House, and they could only engage protesters if they were engaged themselves on DC streets. The Secret Service repeatedly kept making requests for assistance, calling officer down and calling 1033, which is immediate assistance required. And DC police was prevented from responding. I think that's absolutely terrible, and that's politics getting into law enforcement, much like I faced on January 6th.
And so you were telling me, as we spoke before, that typically a person that protests, that parades on the Capitol, that comes in and says their piece, disrupts Congress or a congressional hearing, that they get a $60 fine and they are processed in and out immediately. I was given the second largest fine in American history for a misdemeanor, and it was $75,000 with $25,000 in restitution for being in the Capitol for 18 minutes. and there was another woman that received, I believe, $100,000 fine. Could you just talk about what that, you and your law enforcement experience, how you see the difference in those two, and how maybe that there was a second tier justice in the application of those punishments?
So, yeah. So if you go back and you look at it, like we were talking about prior to the podcast, if on any given day, if somebody came into one of the house buildings or one of the other buildings, or even into the Capitol, if you had a tour and you were taking a tour and then you went off and you started protesting at the Capitol, we'd go out, we'd give you 3 warnings. If you don't, obey us at the 3rd warning, we're going to go ahead and place you under arrest for that's not even unlawful entry. It's I'm forgetting the charge right now, but it's not a $60 fine. It's a $50 fine. It's a 61D is the issue charge we give you. We give you a 61D obstruction.
I think they call it parading.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it is. It's parading. It's parading inside a congressional building. Thank you. It's a $50 fine. It is an arrest. It's a misdemeanor arrest. But it's an arrest that we can go out, we can give you a ticket. We usually do what's called mass processing. We bring everybody out, write them tickets. They leave, then they have a certain number of days to come down to the Capitol Police headquarters, pay their $50. Their arrest is processed, and then they're sent on their way, and that's it. That's usually how that would happen. And if you look at I think we made 14 arrests on the night of January 6th. The initial arrest reports that came out from Capitol Police, and I don't even know if they're online anymore, listed those, I think, as all except for, I think, one was a misdemeanor. I think we had one weapon charge. Everyone else was initially indicated as a misdemeanor arrest.
I've got a copy.
Yeah. Am I right? I believe they're misdemeanor arrests for the number of those charges.
Yeah, a lot of them were, initially let go the next day, and then a few of them they did come back and arrest again, and then a few of them they never touched, which is interesting. But now, as far as the disparity is huge. I faced 30 years of federal charges, and I had to fight it in court for 4 years. That just, and I never even expected that. Like, based on what we had just gone through in 2020, like, I never expected anything like that coming down.
Yeah, and that just reminded me, Will, I need to finish up answering Brady's question. I think you're tying into it is, in my 30 years of law enforcement, I've made a lot of arrests when I was with DC Police, and there was many times that we'd take people down for very serious arrests. I had one case where a guy had pulled out a gun and tried to shoot a partner, and we'd take them down, and you'd take them down to the U.S. Attorney's office. You'd take them through what's called a papering process, where they'd review, what the charges, the matters of the case, and they'd often downgrade these cases. They'd reduce them, or they'd just outright no paper them, which means they'd drop all charges. But we'd have some of these cases reduced to, a person with a gun trying to assault somebody to attempt possession of ammunition. It's crazy what they're reducing things to. So when you think about, some of these people that were charged that were up there, and I'm you do the crime, you do the time type of person, where if you're up there and you're violently assaulting officers or something like that, you need to be held accountable. But in my 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen the level of penalties that were being handed out, like we saw with some of the J6 defendants. People that were being charged with, parading, obstructing Congress, and getting multiple years in jail. I can't think of anybody in the District of Columbia that's gotten multiple years in jail for a misdemeanor. It's just, it never happens.
Well, and I think when you do that to one side of the political spectrum, you kind of hurt the reputation of the entire justice system, because people lose faith in, like, how you're treating some people differently than others. So,
well, that's why Lady Justice is blind.
Yeah,
because you don't want to have those biases that come into it. You don't want bribery. You don't want bias to come into how justice is delivered. And when people lose faith that justice is going to be fairly delivered, it causes a lot of concerns in society. So it's something that's important, regardless of the politics behind it. Everyone should get a fair trial, fair penalties, based on what's happened in the past, things like that. So yeah, I tend to agree with you there.
Now, hopefully, I know Brady has mentioned to me that potentially you're willing to chat with us again and go through some of the video and kind of give us your perspective as the chief in the command post of what was going on. One thing I noticed from reviewing video, and we talk about timing of the pipe bombs and whatnot, but a lot of Capitol Police had been moved to the north and the east side right before events began to unfold because the vice president, his motorcade had arrived. Do you think that had any like, obviously if there was going to be a planned entry on the west, you think that would have to be pretty sophisticated if they were planning that timing around the VP motorcade?
Yeah, that would have been sophisticated, but I mean, it's standard. We knew the VP was coming up. I think this time he came in, I think through the south barrier. Because I talked the book. I think he arrived right around 11:53, and he usually would come in from the north, but I think this time he came in from the south barrier off Independence Avenue, came up, turned around, went in through the Senate carriage, if I remember correctly. That would just be a usual deployment of resources that we put over there. I think one thing, going back and looking at what happened on the West Front, and it's sad because my officers should have been better prepared, but I think a lot of people didn't expect anything to happen until the president's speech was over.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that this group, that initially became violent with my officers on the West Front, happened while the speech was still taking place. I mean, that's happened at 12:53. Speech, I think, went till 1:05, 1:10 maybe. So I think that caught some people off guard, and they weren't expecting that. But yeah, they should have been prepared and in their gear.
The last question I have for you, and I'm going to we'll take it for the rest of the time, is all three of us were political scapegoats to some degree. You had your retirement pulled from you. Will and I had to go through endless court hearings for years. I spent $1.2 million defending myself, and our names were just tarnished completely. And there seems to be a call, and it seems to be growing louder now for there to be restitution for people. And I understand some people on January 6th were beating police officers and doing terrible things, and we're not talking about those guys. But do you feel like that restitution is due in some of these cases?
Well, that's an interesting one. Well, I think you answered, for some. I think you look at it on a case by case basis. If you have, and let me say this. I know when you talk about, my what happened to me, I felt like, yeah, it was devastating. What happened to me, loss of the career. I lost a lot of friends over that. People immediately thought, oh, look, he's involved. Whatever it is. But I didn't have to go to jail. I wasn't sitting in jail. So, for some of the folks that ended up going and sitting in jail for these really low level charges, that's really tough to see, especially when you have, number of people that committed suicide. Four people. I think it was. So. Yeah, that were facing charges. So I don't think I'm in the same boat as that. So with that said, I do think that there very well could be a case for restitution for some of the people that were facing misdemeanor charges and were put in solitary confinement or put in jail. Charges and penalties that were far in excess of what we've ever seen in Washington D.C. before. So I wouldn't rule that out.
Do you think if we found out that there were other agencies who might have been culpable for events, that some of the officers at the Capitol should get some form of restitution as well?
Well, I will say this, as more of the investigation goes on, and I think some of the most recent revelations that you had, or some of the recent allegations, let me say, that you had regarding the pipe bomb, I think that just goes to show that there needs to still be really strong investigations about what's happening, and does this tie into something bigger? I think when you look at it and you say, hey, there's a there could be. So let's see, your question I think specifically was restitution for the officers.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they didn't go through prison, but at the same time, if there was some type of government entity that was doing some things to cause events to go off the way that they did, like a lot of these officers did have their lives affected as well. And I've talked to officers who, like me, they think about January 6th every day of their life since then. It continues to dominate their life. And
And there were multiple suicides on their part.
Yeah. So a number of the officers, I tend to agree. So if for some reason, again, I hate working in hypotheticals. If something came out and said, "Hey, well, we had this earth-shattering thing that we now see there's something behind it," I would suspect there should be some type of restitution, especially for those officers. You've got a Montgomery County officer that had a severe brain injury as a result and hasn't been able to return to work. You've got a Capitol Police officer that I don't think has been able to return to work. Some significant injuries. You had Brian Sicknick. You had the one death, even though they said it was natural causes from. I think he had 2 strokes at the base of his brainstem. The person, the pathologist that did the autopsy, did say that in a interview that he felt that was related to what he experienced that day. It's hard not to keep those two separate. So I do think there are some issues. I think some people have already seen some restitution, whether it's through the Police Memorial Fund or different things like that. Who knows? But I think if you found where there was a party that they felt was at fault and behind something, that just, I think, opens up other doors. I think that'd be a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you talking to us today, Chief. And I know, again, it's important, I think, in my mind, for police and protesters, defendants to talk to each other. And there may be a few on both sides of that who will never be in the mood to talk to each other. But I think we were all involved in an important moment in history, and we all have to find a way to move forward together. And I think we have to consider, what is the future of America and what are we going to make that future? So kind of the lessons learned from this, looking back at what happened, what are the bigger implications for our country and maybe for Capitol Police or the people involved?
So first, I'd say absolutely. One of the reasons I had agreed to come on this, Will and Brady, was because I do believe there needs to be that dialogue. I've always prided myself in the fact that whether I was with DC or whatever, if there's going to be a protest, I don't mind going and talking to the protesters. If we can develop some type of initial rapport, that's going to help hopefully keep things nice and peaceful, and we're going to move forward. But I think it's important to have that rapport. The implications, I think. This is something, just being able to talk between different sides, we're lacking in the U.S. right now. You don't see people, especially our politicians, being able to have what I consider to be cordial communications between each other. And that's sad because, here we are in a position where, if we don't start talking and getting along really, really quickly, think about it, we're the United States of America. Where's the united part lately? It just doesn't seem like people are talking and really getting along that well. So I think first and foremost, being able to talk has a big, profound impact on where we are as a country. I think that's something we're lacking right now. But I think as far as like Capitol Police, I think moving forward, I think they've revamped their intelligence unit. I think it's important for them to have accurate intelligence moving forward, just so they can be prepared. We don't need Big Brother intelligence. We just need intelligence that says how to properly be prepared, and let's be prepared so everybody can have a nice, safe, and peaceful experience and an event. So hopefully that's been taken care of. But I still think there's lots to do, lots to learn. There's still so many questions to answer. I'm just waiting and hoping those questions will come through. And I keep trying to do my best to try and help answer those questions.
And I think that the book does a lot to help add clarity to people, because there's a lot of questions that are answered in the book, but then it also asks good questions as well. Josh, would you mind putting the book up so the audience can see it?
Courage Under Fire.
And we encourage you to get the paperback version of that. Chiefs told us that has the most updated information, and it is a very thorough description of the events of that day. So we hope you go out and take a look at it.
I appreciate it.
Chief, Will, I look forward to speaking to you again. We're going to get some, I think the next time we get together is going to be very interesting. Will has spent years collecting some of the most important footage that I think also does some things to answer questions as well as to beg some giant begs questions themselves as to the mystery of what happened to that day. And we are very grateful that you'll help us sort some of that out next time we meet.
Sounds good.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity, Brady. Thank you. Will, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure to chat with both of you.